Continuing our Masechet Berachot, and we are on Daf Mem Vav Amud Bet, a few lines before the white lines. The Limud of Amud Yomi, Father Kislev, has been dedicated by Shahav and Shana Rabbi for health, happiness, and prosperity of their family, and by Aaron and Miriam Zaguri, the Nishmat Idit Bat Miriam, that the Neshama should have an Aliyah. Amen. So we're just going to quickly review from 2 dots, which is 9 lines up, 10 lines up from the wide lines. The Gemara wonders, Ad hechan birkat hazimun, until where is birkat hazimun? So we spoke about the fact that when you have 3 people eating together, 3 or more, we have zimun, which is nevarech shachalnu mishelo. So until where is that? Is it only nevarech shachalnu mishelo, or is it also including what we call the first bracha, Hazan et Hakol? The bracha of Hazan, we call it, right? So the Gemara brings a machloket, and the disclaimer is that this Gemara is a very complicated Gemara. We're going to understand it, learn it, based on Rashi, Tosafot, the Tosafot Harosh, many other Rashba, many other Rishonim have a pile of questions on Rashi, and hence they learn the Gemara completely different. But for the sake of keeping things understandable and simple, we're just going to go through the Gemara based on Rashi's understanding, and this is how it's going to be. So says the Gemara, it's Bachloket. Rab Nachman Amar ad Nevarech, Rab Sheshat Amar ad Hazan. Rab Nachman says it's only Nevarech. The way we basically deal with it, only Nevarech is Birkat Hazan. So we'll call this Rab Nachman. This is Rab Nachman, and Rab Sheshat holds that it's both of them. So this is how they understand. Rab Nachman holds is only this, and Rab Sheshat says both of them together. So says the Gemara, how do you understand the following piece then? Nema ketanai. Let us suggest that this is perhaps a machloket tanaim. The Tani Chada, one Braita says Birkat HaMazon is either Shenayim veShelosha, is 2 or 3 brachot, and there is a different Braita that says Shelosha v'Arba'a is 3 or 4 brachot. So says the Gemara, if you assume that the bracha of Hatov v'Metiv is the Rabbanan, later on the Gemara is going to discuss the history of the Birkat Hatov v'Metiv. 2 pages from here, Daf Memchet Amud Bet, we're going to have a whole story about Hatov v'Metiv that basically sets this separate. The Gemara now assumes that this is rabbinic. These are biblical, and this is rabbinic. What's the history of this? Now we are assuming, and I'm jumping the gun, the story the Gemara is going to say in 2 pages from now, that when they had the Haruge Betar, right after about 50, 60 years after the Khurban, they had the destruction of the city of Betar, which was equivalent in the level of tragedy, was equivalent of the Khurban itself. It was a tremendous catastrophe of hundreds of thousands, not millions of people that were killed, cold blood. This was after the Bar Kokhba's revolt and so on. Without getting into too many details, the Romans destroyed it and they left the city with the piles of body just like that. They did not allow the Jews to bury the bodies. And on the Tu B'Av of 3 years later, they allowed them to bury the bodies, and miraculously 3 years passed and the bodies did not rot. This was one of the miracles that we learned about it in Masechet Ta'anit, in the last piece of Masechet Ta'anit, of why it is that Tu B'Av is one of the happiest days of the year. If you remember, that's the discussion. So because of that, they instituted the bracha of Hatov v'Metiv, as the Gemara is going to explain what's hatov and what's metiv. So that would, of course, be a rabbinic institution if this fourth bracha was instituted at that juncture of time, right? So now with all of this in mind, the Gemara says there is a machloket in two braitas. One braita says Birkat HaMazon is either 2 brachot or 3 brachot. The other braita says Birkat HaMazon is either 3 brachot or 4 brachot. So now how do you fit that with our machloket? So Gemara says, let's assume that Hatov V'Metiv is out of the picture because this is the Rabbanan. So if this is the Rabbanan, you're left with this. So the Manda Amar that holds is 2 or 3, and the Manda Amar that says is 3 or 4. Those two braitas, maybe that's exactly the machloket between Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshat. Because, come to think about it, if Rav Nachman says the bracha of Shachal Nevarach Shachal Mishelo is separate, and that's the bracha of Zimun. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4. If you are saying eating together with 3 people, you will end up having 1, 2, 3, 4 brachot. If you're saying it without people, you're alone, sitting and eating alone, so you won't have this, you'll have 1, 2, 3. So that's 3 or 4. So who is that? The braita that says 3 and 4 is Rav Nachman. But according to Rav Sheshat, what do you have? You have 2 or 3 because these two are together. So if you're eating with people, you have 3. 1, 2, 3. And if you are alone, you don't have the bracha of Zimun, which is comprised from 2 brachot by itself. Nevarech Shachalu Mishalo and Hazar et Hakol. You don't have that. You only have Al Haaretz, Ba'al HaMazon and Bonei Yerushalayim. You will have 2. So that's 2 and 3. So that's the suggestion of the Gemara on the onset of this. And therefore, you see, what we assumed as machloket Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshat is really a machloket way before, generations before, in the time of Tanaim. Gemara says no. Tanaim don't have a machloket. It's only a machloket Amoraim. Both Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshat could read both of those braitas according to themselves. So therefore, it doesn't have to be a machloket in the time of Tanaim. It's only a machloket of Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshat. How would they read these two according to themselves? Let's go through it. So far, we're clear? Okay. Now the Gemara is going to say, Rav Nachman is going to read both of those braitas, which are Tanaic work, and Rav Sheshat also is going to read both of them. In other words, both according to Rav Nachman and according to Rav Sheshat, you could have a benching that is 2 brachot, you could have a benching that's 3 brachot, and you could have a benching that's 4 brachot. How do you do that? Now I have to explain that according to both of them, right? Because if both of them are going to read both of the braitas have the minimum of 2 brachot and the maximum of 4 brachot. So now both Rav Nachman and Rav Sheshat has to fit with all of those pieces of information. How is that? Says the Gemara. Let's read it through. Lo, says the Gemara, 2 lines up from the wide lines. Lo, Rav Nachman metares l'tameh, Rav Sheshat metares l'tameh. Each one of them answers both of the braitos according to their own shita. Rav Nachman metares l'tameh. Let's start with Rav Nachman, right? Which is the more simple one. Rav Nachman is the one that holds that the bracha of Nevarech is the only bracha of Zimun. Azan is a separate bracha. So says the Gemara, the Kule Alma ad Nevarech, everyone holds, both of the braitas hold that the bracha of Zimun is only this first line, above the line, right? That's bracha of Zimun. This is already the first bracha, the separate bracha. So now, Manda Amar Shalosh V'Arba Shapir. So according to that understanding, the braita that says Birkat HaMazon is either 3 or 4, that's completely simple and pashut, because if you're eating alone, you have 1, 2, 3 brachot. Easy. If you have Zimun, which means you're eating 3 and more people, then you have 1, 2, 3, 4 people. Brachot, right? That's simple. Umanda Amar Shatayim V'Shalosh. The other braita is a problem, which says Birkat HaMazon is either 2 or 3 brachot. Says Rab Nachman, Amar lecha, hacha bebirkat poalim askinan. We're talking about workers. Workers, they have a abridged version of Birkat HaMazon. The Amar Mor poteach behazan vekolel bonei Yerushalayim bebirkat haaretz. They swallow up these two brachot in one, the poalim, workers, because you want them to do a shorter Birkat HaMazon. So therefore, you compress these two, encapsulate both of the concepts in one bracha. So what happens? So if the worker is eating alone without zimun, it will be how many brachot? Right? It will be 2. If he's eating with other people, it would be 1, 2, 3. Right? So that's Rab Nachman. Rab Nachman is off the hook. He explained how Birkat HaMazon could be 2, how Birkat HaMazon could be 3, and how Birkat HaMazon could be 4. We're good. Well, you're going to get stuck with Rav Sheshet, because Rav Sheshet, how are you going to have 4? These 2 are 1. So the maximum you could have is 1, 2, 3. How do you get 4 according to Rav Sheshet is going to be the question of the Gemara. Says the Gemara. So that's Rab Nachman. Rav Sheshet metares l'tameh. Rav Sheshet answers it according to his shita as well, both of the braytas. The kule alma ad hazan. That both braytas hold that these 2 are the bracha of zimun. The zimun ends here. Birkat HaMazon of a single person starts from here and on. So says the Gemara, Manda Mar Shtayim V'Shalosh Shapir. So the Braita that says Birkat HaMazon is either 2 or 3, that fits. Because if you're alone, eating without zimun, you have 1, 2, right? And if you have with zimun, so you have 1, 2, 3. So that's easy. But according to the Braita that says Shalosh ve'arba, according to that Braita that says it's 3 or 4, Kasavar Hatova Metiv Deoraita. We're stuck. We're on the hook. That Mandamar says Rav Sheshet, he drops the big chidush that Mandamar holds this 4th bracha is really not rabbinic, but that also is Deoraita. So once that's also Deoraita, you have 1, 2, 3, and then these 2 together will be 4. Okay? Fine. Now the Gemara is going to go through a series of 3 proofs that this bracha is not Deoraita. So the Gemara is going to knock it completely off. You want to suggest that Tova B'Tiv is Deoraita? It can't be. And the Gemara is going to go through 3 different proofs that it can't be that bracha of Tova B'Tiv is Deoraita. Says the Gemara. Amar Rav Yosef, Tedada Tova Metiv Lav Deoraita. I'll prove to you, says Rav Yosef, that the last bracha of Hatova Metiv can't be Deoraita. Shehare Pa'alim Okrim Ota. Simple proof. When you have workers do not say Hatova Metiv. If Hatova Metiv would be Deoraita, would be a biblical chiyuv, just because you're busy with working with someone else, you're going to skip a bracha Deoraita? Of course not. So from the very fact that you see we give it off to the workers, to the Po'alim, it must be that's only a rabbinic addition, and you could do without it. So therefore, when you're working for someone else and every minute counts that you have to go back to work, we give it off. The Po'alim don't say the bracha v'hatov v'ametiv. So that's proof number 1. Amar Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Shmuel bar Marta says, in the name of Rav, Teda. You should know a second proof. Teda da Tova Metiv lav Doraita. You should, prove that Tova Metiv is not Doraita. Share potech ba bebaruch ve'en chotem ba bebaruch. Because you start with Baruch and you don't end with Baruch. Now we're going to discuss some general rules about brachot. But what the Gemara is going to arrive at is the following. If Hatova Metivas Deoraita, and you have series of brachot Deoraita back to back, give me a pinching, back to back, then you would have it just like the other brachot. How does the Birkat HaMazon start? Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, right? Hakel hazan otanu. That starts with bracha and ends with bracha, the first bracha of benching. You go through the whole thing. Poteach et yadecha u'masbiach l'chol chai ratzon. Baruch ata Hashem hazan et hakol. That's the first bracha. The second bracha starts with what? Nodeh lecha. Where's the Baruch ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam? Doesn't exist. You started without the bracha. You ended with bracha, which would be the second bracha, Birkat HaMazon, and the third one is the same thing. The second bracha finishes Ufares Otanu Al Hakol Baruch Ata Hashem Al Haaretz V'Al HaMazon. Right? That's the second bracha. Third bracha starts what? Rachem. Again, there's no Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. Rachem Hashem Elokeinu aleinu v'al Yisrael mach v'Yerushalayim yirach v'arasiyu mishkan kevodach, and then ends with Borei Yerushalayim. That's three brachot. The fourth bracha starts with a Baruch Ata Hashem. Why? If that's a bracha deoraita, that should have followed the same pattern of a bracha hasemucha lechaverta, a bracha that is adjacent to its friend, to the previous bracha, does not start with Baruch Ata. You started with Nodeh lecha, you started with Rachem. So from the very fact that you see, we start the fourth bracha, Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Hakel Avinu, Malkeinu Adinu, that is the raya that this is not a regular bracha. The oraita is an addition that was added later on to the bracha. So that's going to be the proof of the Gemara. But the Gemara goes through a few loops of general rules of the brachot, how the brachot work. Says the Gemara, Kedetanya, as we learned 3 lines up. As we learned in the Braita, Kol brachot kulan, Choteach bahem bebaruch vechotem bahem bebaruch. All the brachot, the structure of the bracha is, you started with Baruch, you ended with Baruch. Sefer HaChinuch writes, the explanation of why it is that you have to start with Baruch and end with Baruch is something very similar to the structure of the tefillah that we have. That you start with Shevach of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, with praise of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that's Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam. And the last piece of the bracha that you say is actually mentioning the topic that you want from Hashem, the thing that you are saying, either things that you want or things that you are praising in specific. Thanking HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's praise and it's thanks or asking. So it says, the Gemara, therefore the structure of every bracha is Poteach bebaruch vechotem bahem bebaruch. Chutz birkat haperot, there are exceptions. Exceptions are birkat haperot, a regular birkat hane'enin, you don't end with Baruch, you just started with Baruch. Ubirkat mitzvot, when you say la'aniach tefillin, litatev b'sisit, those are the beracha on the mitzvot. Ubracha semucha lechaverta, and a bracha that is adjacent to its friend. Ubracha acharona shebekriyat shema, yesh men shepoteach b'hem bebaruch. Ve'en chotem bebaruch. There are those brachot that you started with Baruch, you don't end it with Baruch, and there are those ones ve'yesh mehen shechotem bahem bebaruch ve'en poteach bahen bebaruch. And there are those that you end it, but you don't start them with Baruch. Now, we gave examples already of the ones that start with Baruch, don't end with Baruch, right? The Birkat HaPerot, and so on and so forth. And then you have the ones that you start without the bracha and you end it with bracha, like the examples that we gave, like the bracha Sumucha Lechaverta, when it's adjacent to another bracha and so on. So it says the Gemara, Ve'hatova metiv. What is the bracha V'hatova metiv? Poteach bebaruch ve'en chotem bebaruch. You start Hatova metiv with Baruch Ata Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam, Hakel Avinu. Right? That's the bracha of Hatov HaMetiv. It doesn't end with anything. It just says, and then you go to Harachamans. So says the Gemara, if the bracha of Hatov HaMetiv was a biblical bracha, it would not have started with a Baruch. It would become a bracha semucha lechaverta. We just learned that the brachas muchal chaverta is an exception to the rule, and it will not start with Baruch. We just learned that in the Braita. So why is it in the world that the bracha v'atov v'amativ starts with Baruch Atah Hashem? Must be that the bracha v'atov v'amativ is not a biblical bracha. It does not follow the same pattern as the first three brachot that we have in benching, and must be that it is a rabbinic addition later on in time. So that's the proof, the second proof of the Gemara. Michlal, the bracha bifnei atzmahi. You see from here that bracha v'atov v'amativ, it's its own bracha. Ve'amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rab Nachman has a third proof that hatov v'amativ is not biblical. Says Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak, Hedada hatov v'amativ lav d'oraita. I proved to you that hatov v'amativ is not d'oraita. Shahare okrinota bebet ha'avil. Because in bet ha'avil, Rachman litzlan, you don't say hatov v'amativ. Now, it's machloket Tanaim, as we're going to see. But the fact that a school of thought in Tanaim says, when you go in Bet Avel, you don't say Hatov V'Ametiv, you just say a different bracha. You say Dayana Emet, right? That by itself shows that's not the Oraita, because do you say something else instead of Hazar et Hakol? You say something else instead of Al Haaretz V'Al Hamazon? No. Anything that's biblical, if it would be a conceptually biblical thing, you would not take it away just because you're in Bet Avel. In Bet Avel also you have to say benching. So if it's biblical, you would not skip that concept. Says the Gemara, Kedatanya, as we learned in the Braita, Ma'em Omrim beBet Avel. What do we say in Bet Avel for benching? Say Baruch Hatov V'Ametiv. The Tarakama holds, you say the same thing as you say every day. You say the first, second, third bracha, and for the fourth bracha, you say Hatov V'Ametiv. You don't change anything. Rabbi Akiva holds, no, you say Baruch Dayan Ha'emet. Instead of saying Hatov V'Ametiv, you only say Dayan Ha'emet. So says the Gemara, Hatov V'Ametiv in Dayan Ha'emet lo. The Tanakama, the first Shita, holds that you say Hatov V'Ametiv and you don't say Dayan Ha'emet in the house of Avel. Ela ema af Hatov V'Ametiv. Says no. You not only say Hatov V'Ametiv, you say Dayan Ha'emet for sure, but you also say Hatov V'Ametiv according to Tanakama. So from there you see that Rabbi Akiva, who says you say Dayan Ha'emet, he holds you don't say Hatov V'Ametiv. In other words, if you lost me, listen again. I'll say it in a different way. If I would read Rabbi Akiva's Shita, I would say, well, Tanakama holds, you say Hatov V'Ametiv. Rabbi Akiva says, you say Hatov V'Ametiv, but you add Dayan Ha'emet. When Rabbi Akiva says you say Dayan Ha'emet, it doesn't mean replace Hatov V'Ametiv with Dayan Ha'emet. It says, no, you say Hatov V'Ametiv, because that's the Oraita, and you add Dayan Ha'emet. Well, you can't read the Machloket like that. Because Tanakama for sure holds that you say Dayan Ha'emet. You're in Bet Avel. So, in other words, the Machloket has to be learned like this. Tanakama holds, you say Dayan Ha'emet, and you say Hatov V'Ametiv. You only add Dayan Ha'emet. So then, if that's correct, what does Rabbi Akiva hold? Then Rabbi Akiva says you say Dayan Ha'emet. Must be, the only way to read it is, Rabbi Akiva says you do not say Hatov V'Ametiv, you only say Dayan Ha'emet. How in the world can you have a bracha dropped just because you're in Bet Avel? The only way that's possible is that bracha is not biblical. Had it been Minat Torah, there would be no scenario in which you could skip that bracha. The reason you could drop it, you could skip it, is because it's not the Oraita. So that's the third proof of the Gemara. So let's go through it again, Rabotai. What are the three proofs that we have? A, yalla, help me. The workers skip it. B, starts with bracha. It doesn't follow the regular pattern of brachas muchal chaverta. And third, Amar Rabbi Akiva, correct. that in Bet Avel, according to Rabbi Akiva, you skip it. So you have three ironclad, complete proofs that this cannot be the Oraita, says the Gemara. Now says the Gemara, Morzutra ikla leberav Ashi, itra be milta. Morzutra was visiting Rav Ashi's house, and there was an Evil, Chas v'Shalom, his son had passed away. So Patach ubari Hatov Ametiv. He started saying Hatov Ametiv. Then he said, El Emet, Dayan Emet. You want to know what's the text, by the way, of Dayana Emet? It's not a regular bracha of Dayana Emet, Baruch Atah Hashem Dayana Emet. It is a little bit of a different text, according to the Gemara. When Rabbi Akiva says that you say Dayana Emet, what's the text of Dayana Emet? Here it is. Says the Gemara, Patach uberich. He said the bracha of Hatov Ametiv, El Emet, Dayan Emet. Hashem is a true judge. Shofet Betzedek. He judges with justice. Lokeach b'mishpat. He takes the neshamot with judgment. V'shalit be'olamo la'asot bo kirtzono. He governs the world with his will. Ki kol derachav mishpat. All of his ways are just. Shehakol shelo, everything is his. V'anachnu amo v'avadav, we are his nation, we are his servants. Ubakol anachnu chayavim lehodot lo, with everything and in everything we are obligated to acknowledge him, to thank him. Ulbarechom, and to bless him. Goder pratzot beYisrael, the one that stands in front of breaches in Am Yisrael. Hu yigdor et hapirsa. He should also, complete this breach that we have had, losing someone, a member, a family member, a friend. Hu yigdor hapirsa azot beYisrael lechaim. That's the text of the bracha of Dayan Haemet. So says the Gemara now, going back to the machloket of Rav Sheshat and Rav Nachman. It says the Gemara, lehechan hu chozer. Where do you go back to? In other words, imagine we had a whole machloket of when you have two people that finish, and the third one is not finished yet, or the third one joined a little bit later, so he's not finished yet. So we said, one person has to wait for two, but two people don't have to wait for one. You remember that? So let's imagine the two are saying, okay, Rabotai, we're saying benching, we're going. This guy's not finished yet. So they say Zimun. He listens to the Zimun that they say. They leave, and he is left with half a sandwich. He's still finishing his meal. So when he does finish his meal, where does he go back to? The three that said Zimun, they said Nevarach Shachar Mishelo, they said Hazan, and they left. Now he heard, the third guy heard these two brachot already that he had to say. That's Birkat HaZimun. Now, when he says his own Birkat HaMazon, where does he go back to? Does he go back to the beginning of Hazan, or does he go back to where he left off, basically, which is really the second bracha? He was in the middle of his meal, and he heard the first bracha of Hazan et HaKol already from them as part of his zimun. So does he go back now there or not? Says the Gemara. Again, we're learning this according to Rashi. As we mentioned, the Tosafot, Arosh, Rashba, many Rishonim have a lot more to say about this. We keep it simple. Says the Gemara. The Hechan Hu Choser, to where does he go back? Rab Zvid, Mishmeta Abaye Amar. Rab Zvid says in the name of Abaye, Choser leRosh. He goes back to the beginning of the bracha. So he was joined with the Zimun. They said the bracha of Zimun, according to Rav Sheshat, until Hazan, right? And now this guy was stopping his Seudah. He heard the bracha of Hazan. So where does he go back to right now? So Choser Lerosh means he goes to the beginning of Bracha Hazan, right? Because he was obligated, he became obligated to Zimun. So because he became obligated to Zimun, he has to say the Bracha of Hazan, according to Rav Sheshat. Remember, Rav Sheshat is the one that says Zimun includes both. So the Bracha of Hazan at HaKol is included. But he heard this already when the two said Birkat HaMazon. But he has to say it also because he ate with two people. So does he say it again, even though that he heard it? Or does he not say it? So the first Shita says, no, he says it again. He goes back and he starts from the very beginning of Birkat HaMazon because it's chayav to say it. The Rabbanan say, no, Lemakom Shpasak. He said half of the benching already in the middle of his sandwich. He doesn't have to go back and say Hazan again. He stopped by Hazan at HaKol. He starts the bracha, the second bracha of Birkat HaMazon from where he left off. Amar Neresh Kalutar Rav Sheshat. Now some good words about the Persians, right? We're going to start this. We're not going to get the chance to finish it. Actually, we're just going to leave it off here by 2 dots. This is going to be a Persian Gemara, so to speak, that we're going to see Bezat Hashem in the days to come.